Black uniforms with silver skulls, lightning bolts on collars, death's head insignia which caused whole villages to become deserted when seen on the horizon. The SS thought they were invincible, the master race imposing the final solution on occupied Europe. But what occurred when the tables were turned? When these very same men were facing the barrels of Soviet rifles and had their hands up in surrender, the Red Army didn't read Geneva Conventions to SS prisoners. They recalled Babi Yar. They recalled the burnt villages. They recalled the mass graves during 1943 to 1945 when Soviet troops advanced west into Ukraine, Belarus, and Poland. They took thousands of SS personnel, officers, guards, group killers, concentration camp personnel captive. The fate that befell them wasn't pretty. Soviet documents, German accounts, and mass grave locations report a tale of methodical vengeance that equaled the cruelty these men inflicted upon Soviet terrain. If you appreciate recorded World War II history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to contribute to our work. Also, comment from what city you're listening in. This script is researched and accurate based on sources in Soviet military archives and German federal archives. Now, let's continue with the story. July 19, 1943, near Pruorovka. Following the largest ever tank battle, Soviet forces broke through German lines and took 237 POWs, among them 14 SS Totenov officers and 38 enlisted men of the Death's Head Division. The regular Wehrmacht prisoners were treated routinely, sent to camps provided with water. The SS men were segregated on the spot. The 4th Guards Tank Army Lieutenant Colonel Evine Sidorov reported that the SS prisoners were divested of their uniforms and boots. They were marched barefoot through the same villages their own units had torched 3 days before. Villagers lined the streets. Some stoned them, others simply gazed. One woman spat in the face of SS Oberer Klaus Weber, the officer who had personally ordered her husband executed. Weber's corpse was discovered in a ditch 2 kilometers outside Pruorovka, bullet hole in the rear of the left ear. No record of a trial exists. The trend was obvious from the beginning. Ordinary German troops could live through Soviet captivity. SS men seldom did. Soviet Order No. 270, dated August 4, 1943. Sarsi explicitly indicated that SS formation members were to be regarded as war criminals rather than prisoners of war. This was not capricious retribution. It was policy. NKVD Captain Dmitry Fokov recorded interrogating SS Hauptsturmführer Heinrich Miller, a prisoner taken during the Kharkov retreat. Miller had commanded an NATS commando group that had killed 8,000 civilian bystanders in occupied Ukraine. The interrogation continued for 6 days. Volkov's report itemizes the techniques employed: sleep deprivation, cold water immersion, rifle butt beatings, and what Soviet records euphemistically referred to as intensified questioning methods. On day 4, Miller admitted personally having killed 234 Jewish children in Berdichev. On day 5, he gave names of collaborators and sites of mass graves. On day 6, he was escorted to a basement room in the NKVD building and shot. His corpse was tossed into a pit with 43 other SS bodies. The pit was discovered by construction workers in 1991. Exactly 48 years later, cold, systematic, final. December 15, 1943. The Soviets captured Koristan, and with it the entire staff of SS training facility Traniki, 112 SS personnel, including the commandoed SS Oberführer Karl Stribel. These weren't frontline soldiers. They were the instructors, the designers of genocide, the men who had schooled Ukrainian and Baltic auxiliaries in how to effectively kill Jewish civilians. The SS men captured by their Soviet captors were packed into cattle cars, the same kind of cars they had used to send victims to death camps. The irony was not lost on their Soviet captors. Lieutenant Boris Petrov documented that some SS officers pleaded for immediate executions instead of deportation to Soviet work camps. They were disregarded. The train ride to Siberia was 18 days long. No warmth, little food, 1 bucket for waste per car. 40 men in each car that was meant for 8 horses. Stribel died on day 12 due to dysentery. His corpse was thrown from the moving train nears. Of 112 SS men who boarded those cattle cars, 29 arrived alive at Kolma gold mines. None survived more than 8 months in the camps. Soviet sources indicate that captured SS troops had less than a 3% survival rate. Routine Wehrmacht prisoners had a 38% survival rate. The disparity was deliberate. Spring of 1944 saw the liberation of the first large extermination camps. Soviet troops arrived in Majdanek on July 24 and discovered signs of mass, systematic murder that appalled even battle-hardened combat soldiers. Scratch marks on walls in gas chambers, warehouses full of human hair, shoes, and gold teeth, crematoria still smoldering with ashes. When Soviet soldiers took the remaining SS guards at Maidan, 17 men in all, into custody, they did not even go through formal processing. Major Alexkov of the 125th Rifle Regiment instructed his troops to compel the SS guards into the same gas chambers they had used. The guards were imprisoned, and poison gas was let in. All 17 perished within minutes. There is a single line about the affair in Klov's report, which was found in Soviet archives in 1994. Fascist criminals were meted out proper justice. No investigation ensued. No one was disciplined. The Red Army saw it as poetic justice. Systematic hunting of SS personnel was not limited to combat areas. Soviet intelligence had meticulously prepared lists of SS officers and their whereabouts. The NKVD ran what they referred to as direct special pursuit groups, special teams that were specifically charged with finding and capturing certain SS war criminals. SS Brigade Führer Erich von Denbigsky, Warsaw Butcher, was arrested on May 8, 1945 in Austria. Soviet agents had pursued him for half a year in 3 nations. Cornered at last in a Salzburg monastery, Boksilowski hoped to negotiate his life by offering information on other war criminals. The Soviet answer was quick and definitive. Boksilowski was interrogated under torture, then shot. His body was shredded and dispersed in various places to avoid any memorial or grave site. Soviet archives reveal this treatment. Dismemberment after execution was routine practice for senior SS officers. If you appreciate written World War II history like this, subscribe. It's the best way you can support our work. Also, comment from which city you're listening to this from. This script is research-based and true with sources in Soviet military archives and German federal archives. Now back to the story. The capture of Berlin in May 1945 gave the Red Army its biggest haul of SS captives. While Soviet troops battled block by block across the German capital, they took about 3,000 SS men guarding the government quarter. These were not camp guards or rear echelon personnel. These were the elite Leibstadt Adolf Hitler members, Nazi leaders' personal bodyguards, the believers who fought to the last. Marshal Georgy Zhukov himself directed that no SS prisoners were to be captured alive during the last battle for the Reich Chancellery. Soviet troops were briefed clearly. Any man who wore an SS uniform was to be shot on the spot. It was done with ruthless method. Colonel Pavel Antonov recorded the killing of 47 SS officers who were taken prisoner within the Chancellery bunker complex on the 2nd of May, 1945. The killings occurred in the self-same courtyard in which Hitler had made his final public outing. Each SS officer was made to kneel next to a pit that had been comparatively quickly excavated by Soviet engineers. One shot in the back of the head. Bodies were dropped into the pit and covered with lime instantly. The highest-ranking SS man taken alive in Berlin was SS Greenfuhrer Wilhelm Mohnke, Chancellery Defense Sector Commander. Mohnke had overseen personally the massacre at Normandy of Canadian prisoners, and the killing of American PS during the Battle of the Bulge. Soviet intelligence had a fat dossier on his war crimes. Mohnke's interrogation lasted 3 weeks in NKVD headquarters in Berlin. Soviet records describe sessions lasting up to 18 hours with interrogators working in shifts to maintain constant pressure. Mohnke was forced to stand for days without sleep, given only bread and water, and subjected to what Soviet documents called physical persuasion methods. On the 26th of May, Mohnke signed a confession outlining his part in several war crimes, including the killing of 78 prisoners of war and execution of 214 Soviet civilians. 3 days later, he was discovered dead in his cell, officially suicide by hanging. Rumor has it he was beaten to death by guards who had lost relatives to SS massacres. The scale of Soviet retribution against SS personnel captured alive went far beyond direct executions. The Soviets set up special labor camps for SS prisoners, facilities with the intent not to keep them in, but to systematically kill them through overwork and starvation. Camp 49 in the KMA area was used solely for SS staff and senior Nazi leadership. Out of 832 SS soldiers deported there between 1945 and 1947, Only 12 remained alive until 1953 when Stalin died. The 98.5% mortality rate in the camp was not an accident, it was the plan. Camp 49 prisoners received 200 grams of black bread, thin soup based on potato peelings, and sometimes a few bits of rotten fish for daily rations. Prisoners labored 16 hours a day in gold mines where temperatures dropped to -40 degrees C. No winter gear was given. Medical treatment was non-existent. Ex-camp guard Victor Saf, interviewed in 1998, remembered that SS inmates were specifically given the most hazardous jobs: clearing creaking mine shafts, working with explosives without protective gear, and taking exposed posts in the midst of Arctic storms. "We had our orders," Sumov claimed. "These fascists were to work until they perished." No exception. The handful of SS staff who survived Soviet captivity were subject to further persecution upon their ultimate return to Germany during the 1950s. Soviet intelligence agencies had kept detailed records of all SS prisoners, listing their crimes, their collaborators, and family members. This data was passed on to East German authorities and utilized for decades of ongoing persecution. SS Rottenführer Hans Kellner, who was taken prisoner at Stalingrad and managed to survive the Soviet war camps, was rearrested by East German police in 1957. Soviet records suggested Kellner took part in anti-partisan activities in Belarus, murdering between 43 and an estimated 43 civilians. He was put on trial, found guilty, and put to death in Leipzig on March 14, 1958, 13 years since his first capture. The systematic character of Soviet vengeance against SS staff is evident when looking at survival rates in various prisoner groups. Normal Wehrmacht troops, who were captured by the Soviets, survived at a 38% rate. Luftwaffe staff 41%, Navy 44%, SS staff 2.7%. These figures weren't due to haphazard battlefield justice or indiscriminate violence. They represent a conscious policy of destruction carried out at all levels of Soviet command hierarchy, from Stalin on down to individual field commanders. The word was the same: SS prisoners were not to survive World War II. The pursuit of SS personnel became nearly obsessive among some Soviet forces. The Third Shock Army kept what they referred to as death books, comprehensive journals of each SS officer killed or taken prisoner, including photographs and personal items. Senior Lieutenant Mail Petro maintained strict records accounting for the execution of 147 SS personnel in the period between June 1944 and May 1945. Petrov's unit was expert in what Soviet command referred to as cleansing operations, deliberate sweeps through German locations for SS personnel trying to hide themselves as ordinary Wehrmacht troopers. The SS blood group tattoo on the left armpit rendered it easy to tell. Any inmate with a tattoo was taken away and executed within hours of being captured. On March 23, 1945, near Frankfurt, under Odor, Petrov's troops captured a German Feldwebel, who presented himself as regular army. The tattoo of blood group exposed him as SS Unscharfer Georg Brenner of the Derloang-Ganger Brigade, which was responsible for massacring citizens in Warsaw and Belarus. Brenner was compelled to bury himself first before he was shot by the same shovel with which he had buried it. The Derlo Brigade constituted the epitome of absolute cruelty by SS. The brigade, made up of convicted prisoners and military offenders, was ordered to annihilate at least 200,000 civilians through anti-partisan action. When Soviet forces eventually trapped the brigade remnants around Berlin, they exercised no restraint. 43 Derloanger troops were taken alive on April 19, 1945. Soviet records confirm they were tortured for 3 days to reveal the sites of mass graves, then shot individually while the rest were forced to witness. The last survivor, 17-year-old recruit Klaus Wever, was made to witness his friends die before being beaten to death with rifle butts. Wever's age offered no protection. Soviet policy was not age differentiated in its treatment of SS personnel. The youngest SS inmate to be killed by Soviet troops was 16 years of age, a member of the Hitler Youth who had been reassigned to Waffen-SS at the close of the war. He was named Friedrich Hoffmann, who was captured during the Breslau defense. He was shot on May 4, 1945, 3 days prior to German surrender. The violence stretched to SS medical staff allegedly safeguarded by Geneva Convention provisions. Dr. Hans Müller, the chief medical officer at Auschwitz-Birkenau, was taken into custody by Soviet troops on January 27, 1945. At the time of the liberation of the camp, Muller had personally directed prisoners to undergo medical experiments, including hypothermia testing and sterilization experimentation. Muller's death was exceptionally cruel. Soviet guards subjected him to the same hypothermia experimentation that he had performed on prisoners. He was stripped to the buff and left in an ice water-filled cell for 6 hours. When he died from exposure, his body was tossed by guards into the same crematorium in which he had burned his victims. The liberation of the concentration camps gave Soviet troops the strongest possible proof of SS atrocities. At Majdanek, they came across detailed reports of daily massacres, signed directives by SS officers, and personal correspondence referencing the efficiency file of killing operations. These records were utilized to identify particular SS individuals for specific elimination. SS Obersturmführer Karl Hooker, who had been captured near Majdanek, had maintained a private photo album of his time at Auschwitz. The album included photographs of SS members enjoying themselves, singing and eating while prisoners were being gassed in the background. The Soviet interrogators used the photographs to help identify other SS officers, and 12 more war criminals were taken into custody and executed. Hooker himself survived 9 days under Soviet interrogation. Every day he was presented with pictures of the children murdered in Auschwitz, and asked to pick out those he had personally picked to kill. On day 9 he was led into a room in which recordings of children crying had been playing non-stop. He was shot while hearing the cries of his victims. The extent of Soviet records demonstrates the organization of their campaign of revenge. NKVD records include exhaustive accounts of 8,437 SS officers who were shot, including names, dates, places, and how they were killed. Each record consists of photographs of the prisoner, compilations of crimes they committed, and what happened to them at the end. Lieutenant Colonel Yuri Dropov, who would go on to head the KGB, personally supervised numerous SS shootings in Austria under German occupation. His accounts indicate compelling SS officers to compose letters to their families detailing their offenses before being executed. The letters would be sent to German addresses as psychological warfare, instilling fear among civilian populations regarding the destiny of SS members. One such note sent by SSHP Scharfer Vera Schmidt to his wife in Munich is, "I have been taken by the Bolsheviks. They have shown me what we did in the camps. God forgive me. I will not see you again." Schmidt was shot 30 minutes after he wrote the letter. His wife received it 6 weeks later along with a picture of his body. The psychological warfare component of Soviet treatment did not stop with SS prisoners. Captured SS families were also treated similarly. When the Soviet army found out that SS officers' wives and children were residing in surrounding towns, they were usually arrested and made to watch as their husbands and fathers were executed. The trauma was not accidental, created to make surviving SS families remember Soviet justice for generations. Anna Muller, the wife of SS Sturmbannführer Hans Müller, was compelled to witness the execution of her husband with her 2 small children. Soviet accounts show this was routine for the families of senior SS officials. The psychological damage was also a part of the punishment, reaching Soviet justice beyond the criminal individuals to their whole lineages. Soviet Marshal Vasily Chuikov, who led troops at Stalingrad and subsequently Berlin, penned in his memoirs, "We showed no mercy to those who showed no mercy to our people. The SS got just what they had coming, nothing less than utter annihilation." The last stage of SS eradication arrived with specialized Soviet units, established expressly to hunt down war criminals seeking to flee through the so-called rat lines to South America. The Smersh organization, whose name literally translated to death to spies, had teams working throughout occupied Germany pursuing fleeing SS officers. Captain Alexander Korv commanded one such team that pursued SS Stendard and Führer Klaus Barbie the Lion's Butcher to a Bavarian safe house. Barbie tortured and killed hundreds of French resistance members, including personally killing children with his own hands. When Soviet troops encircled his hideaway on June 15, 1945, Barbie tried to negotiate. He tried offering Soviet spies full information on American intelligence activities in return for a reprieve from death. Korv's reaction was to shoot Barbie in each kneecap, then pull him to a barn where French resistance survivors were standing in line. They were allowed 30 minutes unsupervised with their torturer before Soviet troops dispatched him. The barn held 17 additional SS bodies by morning. Korv's report merely stated, "French partisans expressed gratitude for Soviet justice." The most inhumane fate probably befell SS staff taken into custody at the Nuremberg trial location. An Allied command transferred responsibility of minor SS war criminals to Soviet authorities. Transfers turned into death penalties presented as lawful procedures. Of the 237 SS personnel exchanged into Soviet hands between 1945 and 1947, 0 returned home. The exchanges occurred at a station in Nuremberg with American and British representatives present to see what they assumed were routine prisoner exchanges. Soviet documents indicate that the trains never arrived in their alleged destinations. They only halted at deserted stations where NKVD groups killed all prisoners and buried bodies in pre-excavated mass graves. U.S. Army Colonel James Patterson, who had commanded some of the transfers, later noted in his diary, "Something didn't feel right about delivering those prisoners to the Soviets. Their officers were too eager, too happy. We never heard anything from any of those men again." Patterson did not initially know the truth until Soviet archives were opened in 1991. The extent of execution comes as shocking when looking at regional Soviet records. In occupied Poland alone, 4,216 SS men were shot by Soviet troops in January-December 1945. In Czechoslovakia, 2,897. In Hungary, 3,412. The figures are the systematic liquidation of a whole organization. Every shooting was recorded with bureaucratic accuracy. NKVD records include death certificates, photographs of dead bodies, and meticulous lists of personal items confiscated from prisoners shot. Gold teeth were pulled out and smelted down. Watches and jewelry were catalogued and shipped to Moscow. Even SS uniform buttons were gathered and recycled. The personal belongings uncovered the humane side of pure evil. SS Oberfuhrer Rudolf Lange, who was executed for his participation in the Rumbula massacre, in which 30,000 Jews were killed, had pictures of his children in his possession, and a love letter from his wife. There was a shopping list written in the handwriting of his daughter in his wallet: bread, milk, butter for Papa. Lange was shot as he was reading the list. A few SS officers made futile attempts at avoiding capture. Soviet troops near Rostow encountered a mass suicide ground where 43 SS officers had taken their own lives to escape Soviet vengeance. They had employed a single grenade, and survivors had finished off each other with daggers. A hastily scrolled paper at the scene contained the message: "Better death than Bolshevik torture." The suicides did not bring any respite from Soviet vengeance. Instructions ordered SS corpses to be mutilated and left unbunged as a warning to local German civilian populations. Rostock bodies were exhibited in town square for 6 days before they were dumped in unmarked graves. Photos of the rotting bodies were sent to surrounding towns as psychological warfare. Soviet agents also targeted SS troops who had been successful at blending into civilian populations. Large networks of informants, such as German communists and concentration camp inmates, gave information on SS members living under assumed names. These tip-offs resulted in some of the most infamous individual killings of the conflict. Hans Bibo, a former administrator of the Lodz ghetto, was found working as a farm, and in October 1945 near Hamburg. He had adopted the identity of a deceased Wehrmacht soldier, and had lived incognito for 6 months before being identified at a local market by a survivor. Soviet agents apprehended him the same evening. Bibo's execution was made a public spectacle. He was taken to the area of the old Lodz ghetto, and was hanged from the same gallows he had used to hang Jewish captives. The survivors of the ghetto were invited to see him hanged. Many hurled stones at his body. His body was left hanging for 2 weeks before it was cut down and burned. The ultimate reckoning was with the revelations as to the location of mass graves throughout Eastern Europe. As Soviet troops freed concentration camps and occupied lands, they discovered proof of systematic genocide that had been carried out by SS units. The extent of the atrocities hardened Soviet minds, and further justified the rough handling of SS prisoners. Treblinka saw Soviet investigators discovering remains of some 870,000 victims in mass graves. Sovietbor saw 250,000 bodies. Auschwitz-Birkenau saw over 1 million killed. Each location had documented lists of SS staff in charge of the killing activities. Soviet Colonel David Dragunsky, who investigated war crimes at several locations, wrote in his 1946 report, "The evidence of SS crimes is overwhelming. These are not soldiers who deserve protection under international law. They are mass murderers who forfeited any claim to human treatment. The Red Army's treatment of captured SS personnel represented a systematic campaign of revenge that matched the industrial scale of Nazi genocide. It was calculated, methodical, and ultimately successful in its goal of eliminating the SS as an organization. Of an estimated 50,000 SS personnel captured by Soviet forces, fewer than 500 survived to see Germany again. In 1991, builders restoring a building in Old East Berlin unearthed a closed basement room with the bodies of more than 200 people. Forensic tests identified all of them as male, between the ages of 20 and 45 tourists, and having marks of execution-style murders. Uniform buttons and insignia pieces confirmed that they were SS staff. Carbon dating put their deaths in 1945 to 1947. Both skulls had one bullet hole in back of the left ear, the typical Soviet method of execution. There are no records of their names, rank, or crimes. They were merely documented as fascist criminals and left in limbo for 46 years. The basement room held one other thing, a Russian handwritten note dated May 15, 1945. The writing was short for Leningrad, for Stalingrad, for all the burned villages. It was witnessed by Captain Boris Vulov of the NKVD, the very officer who had questioned and killed dozens of SS prisoners during the war. The SS thought they were the master race that would dominate Europe for 1,000 years. They lasted 12. When the day of reckoning came, it came in Soviet efficiency and Soviet justice. No mercy, no appeals, no second chances. The wolves were their prey now, and the hunt was pitiless.